This is Japan. Today it's known for anime, sushi, cutting-edge technology, and some of the world's most beloved brands. Millions of tourists visit every year, while characters like Pikachu and Mario are recognized almost everywhere on Earth. It's hard to imagine that this same country was once known for something completely different. Long before Japan became famous for entertainment and innovation, its name was associated with some of the darkest chapters of the 20th century. Its military invaded neighboring countries, entire cities were devastated, families were torn apart, and countless lives were lost as the war spread across the region. Yet today, ask most people what comes to mind when they think of Japan, and they'll probably say anime, Tokyo, Shibuya Crossing, sushi, cherry blossoms, Nintendo, or maybe, even at worst, World War II. But very few could tell you what Imperial Japan actually did. So, how did one of history's most controversial empires become one of the world's most admired countries? And did Japan really wash away its sins, or did the world simply stop looking? To understand how Japan managed to reinvent its image, we first have to remember what that image used to be. By the early 20th century, Japan had transformed itself into one of Asia's fastest-growing military powers. After defeating both China and Russia in separate wars, confidence inside the country soared. Many military leaders became convinced that Japan deserved to stand alongside the great imperial powers of Europe. And just like Britain and France had built vast empires overseas, they believed Japan should do the same. That belief soon turned into expansion. In 1910, Japan formally annexed Korea, beginning a colonial occupation that would last for 35 years. During that period, many Koreans were forced to abandon parts of their language and culture, while thousands were conscripted into factories and military labor. Even today, memories of that occupation continue to shape relations between the two countries. But Korea was only the beginning. In 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China, marking the beginning of one of the deadliest chapters of the Second World War in Asia. As Japanese forces captured city after city, reports of widespread violence followed. The most infamous example came after the capture of Nanjing, then China's capital. Over the course of several weeks, Japanese soldiers carried out mass killings, widespread looting, and countless acts of sexual violence against civilians. Historians continue to debate the exact death toll, but many estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of people were killed. To this day, the Nanjing Massacre remains one of the most painful and politically sensitive events in modern Chinese history. But the violence didn't end there. Hidden behind military bases in occupied China was one of the darkest projects of the entire war. Known today as Unit 731, it was officially presented as a medical research facility. In reality, prisoners, including Chinese civilians, prisoners of war, and others, were subjected to brutal human experimentation without anesthesia. Victims were deliberately infected with deadly diseases, exposed to extreme temperatures, and used in experiments that ignored even the most basic standards of humanity. Many never left alive. As Japan's empire continued expanding across Asia, similar stories emerged from occupied territories. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, Japanese forces rapidly captured large parts of Southeast Asia, including the Philippines, Malaya, Burma, Indonesia, and vast areas across the Pacific. For civilians living under occupation, life often became a daily struggle. Food shortages became common, forced labor increased, entire communities were displaced as resources were redirected toward Japan's war effort. One of the most infamous episodes occurred in the Philippines after the fall of Bataan in 1942. Tens of thousands of exhausted Filipino and American prisoner of war were forced to march for more than 100 kilometers with little food or water under the scorching tropical sun. Those who collapsed were often beaten, bayoneted, or executed where they fell. Thousands died before reaching the prison camps, and the event became known as the Bataan Death March. Elsewhere, Japan began constructing what became known as the Burma-Thailand Death Railway. Stretching through dense jungle, the railway was built using more than 200,000 Southeast Asian civilian labourers and around 60,000 Allied prisoners of war. Workers endured disease, starvation, brutal beatings, and impossible working conditions. By the time the railway was completed, an estimated 90,000 civilian labourers and more than 12,000 Allied prisoners had died, earning it the grim nickname it still carries today. Another painful legacy involved the so-called comfort women system. Across occupied Asia, thousands of women, many from Korea, China, the Philippines and other territories, were forced into military brothels to serve Japanese troops. For decades, survivors fought for recognition and justice, and the issue continues to strain Japan's relationships with several neighbouring countries. By the time Japan surrendered in 1945, millions of people across Asia had experienced occupation, displacement, forced labour, imprisonment, or the loss of loved ones. The war had ended, but the scars it left behind never truly disappeared, which makes what happened next all the more remarkable. The Japanese Empire collapsed, its military was dismantled, its cities were reduced to rubble. If you had asked anyone in 1945 what Japan would be remembered for, anime probably wouldn't have made the list. But history has a funny sense of humour. Instead of rebuilding its reputation with speeches or apologies, Japan rebuilt it with something much more effective: products. First came the cars, then the cameras, then the televisions, then the video games. Before long, companies like Sony, Toyota, Honda, Panasonic and Nintendo had quietly entered millions of homes around the world. Japan wasn't showing up in newspapers because of invasions anymore. It was showing up in living rooms. And then came what might have been Japan's greatest export of all: culture. In the early 2000s, anime exploded across the globe. Manga became a worldwide phenomenon. Pokemon became one of the biggest entertainment franchises in history. Mario became more recognizable than many presidents and prime ministers. Suddenly, an entire generation grew up associating Japan with imagination, creativity, and childhood memories. By the 1990s and 2000s, Japan wasn't just selling products anymore, it was selling an image. An image of spotless streets, futuristic cities, polite people, bullet trains, cherry blossoms, peaceful temples, incredible food, and endless creativity. Japan became one of the world's greatest examples of soft power. Instead of exporting soldiers, it exported stories. Instead of conquering cities, it conquered pop culture. And it worked. Today, ask someone what they know about Japan. They'll probably say Tokyo, anime, Shibuya Crossing, sushi, cherry blossoms, bullet trains, Nintendo, maybe Mount Fuji. If they're feeling particularly historical, they might even mention World War II. But ask them what happened in Nanjing. Ask them about the Bataan Death March. Ask them what Unit 731 was. Ask them about the women forced into military brothels across occupied Asia. For many people outside East Asia, silence. Not because those events didn't happen, not because they weren't horrific, but because they no longer define Japan in the minds of much of the world. And that's what makes this story so fascinating. Japan didn't become admired overnight. It spent decades building a new identity through innovation, economic success, entertainment, and culture. Those achievements are real, and modern Japan is not Imperial Japan. But those achievements also transformed the country's global image so completely that for millions of people, the first chapter of Japan's story has effectively become the last one they read. History wasn't deleted. It was buried under layers of PlayStations, Pokemon cards, sushi, cherry blossoms, and viral videos of impossibly clean streets. That's the power of perception. Give the world enough unforgettable memories, and sometimes the older ones stop being the first thing people remember. Japan didn't erase its history. It changed what the world chose to remember. Today, it's celebrated for its technology, culture and creativity, and for good reason. Modern Japan is vastly different from Imperial Japan, but while much of the world thinks of anime, sushi, and cherry blossoms, millions across Asia still remember occupation, massacres, and unimaginable suffering. For them, these events are not distant chapters in a history book. They remain part of living memory, passed down through families and remembered across generations. History doesn't disappear. Sometimes it's simply overshadowed. And perhaps that's Japan's greatest post-war achievement. Not changing the past, but changing the conversation.